crowds watched solemnly as the body of Representative John Lewis crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge one final time, 55 years after the civil rights icon marched for peace and was met with brutality in Selma, Alabama. Body bearers from the U.S. Armed Forces placed the late Georgia congressman and civil rights icon onto a horse-drawn caisson Sunday at the Brown Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church. From there, the public were allowed to line up to honor Lewis for about a half-mile to the foot of the bridge. Representative Terri Sewell, D.L., thanked Lewis' family during a ceremony at the chapel for sharing the congressman with the public for so many years. "Our nation is better off because of John Robert Lewis," she remarked. "My life is better, Selma is better, this nation and this world is better because of John Robert Lewis." Crowds waited for Lewis' body at the foot of the bridge, where he was met by Alabama state troopers, who safely escorted him across and on to the state capitol. His final march, that final crossing, so different than the first, speaks to the legacy that he leaves behind and the lives that he changed, Sewell said. "It's poetic justice that this time, Alabama state troopers will see John to his safety." As the horse-drawn caisson approached the bridge, those in the masses on the sidewalk could be heard singing for Lewis. In an emotional moment, the voices stopped as Lewis' casket began to make its way across the bridge in silent reverence. Lewis, who died earlier this month at the age of 80, made his last journey across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with only his family to join him. Lewis' son, brothers and sister followed behind the caisson along Lewis' longtime chief of staff wearing shirts emblazoned with the words, "Good Trouble," a nod to Lewis' view on activism. Read more from NBC News. The 16-term lawmaker, often called the conscience of Congress, was a giant of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Lewis was only 25 when he on the peaceful March for Voting Rights across the bridge on March 7, 1965, known today as Bloody Sunday. Lewis suffered a fractured skull and was one of dozens of nonviolent protesters who were hospitalized. News coverage of the brutal beatings prompted increased pressure on Congress to pass the 1965 Voting Rights Act, to bar states from enforcing discriminatory laws that had long hindered prospective black voters. And though Lewis is possibly best known for his march in Selma, he had already emerged as a leading voice in the fight for equal rights and had been arrested a number of times for the cause by that time. As a student at Fisk University in Tennessee, Lewis helped organize sit-ins at segregated lunch counters. He was one of the original Freedom Riders in 1961, taking buses from the North to the Deep South to protest segregation at interstate bus terminals. At 23, Lewis was the youngest person who spoke at the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom.